Great. Okay, so as I'm bringing the PowerPoint up, I'll start talking. Today we transition from the older tree to the willow tree. Each tree has 18 degrees of the sun's ecliptic. Right, there we go. So today is it's the 3rd degree of Pisces, and each tree has 18 degrees. So we're traveling from today until the 21st degree of Pisces. So willow is completely corresponding with Pisces on the sun's ecliptic. Pisces in Welsh bardic lore is the salmon weir. The salmon weir is loaded with metaphors, and of course Taliesin, after the rites of Ceridwen, is found in the salmon weir. So I would argue that in star lore that would correspond now with the willow tree in Pisces. But it's actually the ash tree that takes us from Pisces into Aries, and that's a very important moment which we'll deal with the ash tree. So willow, where am I? The willow tree, there are about 350 different species of willow, and it's hard to tell one from the other. You know, there's some obviously well-known ones like the weeping willow, and the most common ones for the British Isles, i.e. the Celtic North, are what we call white willow and crack willow. And they look very similar as well, except for the crack willow, when you snap a twig, it makes a very loud crack noise, hence its name. And the white willow, its leaves are paler, and when it doesn't crack when you try and snap, it just bends. So they're the two main ones, but there are over 350 different types of willow tree. Now, before I get into the medicine, I'm going to just briefly go over some of the star lore to do with the willow tree, because it's very interesting. And I'm also working on volume 4 of Voices from the Grove, which is dedicated to the willow tree this year. Everybody who's submitted stuff, I'm now editing the book. But it corresponds with an enigmatic mystery that we can just call the Nine Maidens. Now, the Nine Maidens is expressed in culture and Celtic culture in many different ways, you know, but I'll explain as we go along why the Nine Maidens for the willow tree, rather than a single god or goddess like we had Ellen for the birch tree and Bridget for the rowan tree. The willow is the Nine Maidens, or it's a triple goddess, and each aspect of the triple goddess is threefold. So 3 3s are 9. So first of all then, polarity magic, or if you like, full moon magic, directly opposite the willow tree is the blackthorn tree. And I know from looking around just the other day that the blackthorn blossoms are just beginning to bud. They're tiny white little circles. They haven't opened up yet, but they're going to in the next week or so. Now, the full moon is always opposite wherever the sun is. So as the sun is entering willow today, the coming full moon on the 7th of March will be a blackthorn moon. Well, it's quite interesting because the full moon's always opposite. So it will be really interesting round about the 7th of March to start observing the blackthorn coming into blossom during a blackthorn moon. It's a lovely pattern there, organic pattern. So here's a close-up of the diagram from the Owen Grove, patterns that have emerged from looking at the star lore. So if you look in the bottom left-hand corner, just above where it says in bulk, you can see Pisces. you know, so we literally entered the first 3 degrees of Pisces over the last couple of days, and we're now into Willow. And you can see how directly opposite is Blackthorn and Virgo in the top right-hand corner, you know, the descent into the mysteries. Now, it's not just full moon magic to do with Willow and Blackthorn, or in traditional zodiac lore, Pisces and Virgo. There's also esoteric mystery tradition stuff. And there's a definite influence from the ancient world and the mystery traditions in all of this. Now, I'll explain a bit more of that as we go along, but looking back at the bottom left, I've given it the title of the water's edge. And there's 2 reasons for this. The first reason is that the alder tree and the willow tree, of all the 20 trees, they're the 2 that live by the riverside. So whoever designed the sequence of 20 trees, whenever that happened, they put the 2 river trees side by side, alder and willow. Now that makes that corner of the wheel the water's edge, if you like. But that star law is also there because Capricorn, Aquarius, and Pisces are all watery. The Capricorn goat has a fish's tail. You know, it's not a normal goat, it's a fish goat. And Aquarius is pouring water eternally. So it's like pouring water into this side of the zodiac, or this side of the sun's ecliptic. And Pisces is the fish swimming in that water, along with another constellation called Cetus the whale and stuff. You know, that corresponds with the Taliesin shape-shifting story as well. But anyway, whether it's star law or the 2 water-loving trees, alder and willow, right now we're in the water's edge. And there's something very important with that. From the Taliesin tradition, this water's edge is the salmon weir. Taliesin is found floating in the salmon weir at the end of his initiation with Ceridwen, after the end of his rebirth. You know, he's sent down river in a Moses basket and found in the salmon weir. Interesting. Now, there's something that happens in the days of Ash, that is the jump from Pisces into Aries, and that's known as the salmon's leap. You know, and we'll look at that when we look at the ash tree. But the Salmon of Wisdom are indirectly connected with poetic inspiration and the cauldron of inspiration. And the star law of alder and willow is opposite the cauldron of inspiration with the Virgo effigy. Now, there's more to it than that, but these mystery tradition things are there. Now, one of them is that the polarity, the full moon polarity that's coming on the 7th of March, you know, the polarity between Pisces and Virgo gives you a great big asterism of a celestial mermaid, because Virgo is the maiden, Pisces is the fish. So the polarity creates this great big mermaid in the night sky that's always there, you know. Actually in her center point is Cassiopeia, the Queen of Heaven, you know, that's worth thinking about as well. But however, in Arthurian mythology, this is the character Melusine from French mysteries, Arthurian mysteries, and she was a river goddess spirit that had connections with Avalon. And she also represents the Piscean age. Abstract ideas, I know, but the Arthurian and French occult mystery tradition was all wrapped up in this Virgo Pisces polarity. Now, the deep space of the celestial mermaid can correspond with a kind of celestial ocean or infinite ocean, a sea, in the sky, in the heavens, reflected in the rivers and lakes below. So this heavenly mermaid is also, in Arthurian mythology, the lady of the lake, you know, and so we'll look more at Virgo in a minute, but there is this kind of fish-tailed virgin, quite interesting. Now, one of the triple goddesses of the ancient world that corresponded with the ancient mystery traditions, we know from Greek mythology as Hecate or Hecate, you know. Now, her virgin aspect, the virgin face of Hecate, was known as Helise, and Helise means willow. Okay. Here's a thing then, that there was, long before there were the Nine Maidens keeping warm the cauldron of Anu, which is medieval bardic tradition from Wales, there were 9 maidens in ancient Greece. They were the 9 muses. And just like Helise, the virgin aspect of Hecate, the 9 muses lived in the Valley of the Muses at the foot of a mountain called Mount Helicon, the Mount of Willow Trees, the willow trees around the bottom of this mountain. And there were some sacred springs that flowed from Mount Helicon. And these sacred springs were considered by the ancient Greeks, going back to about 700 BC, a long time ago, was known as the source of poetic inspiration. So it's not just 9 muses, but they are actually the source of poetic inspiration. And that finds its way somehow, and I don't know how, but it finds its way into the Welsh bardic tradition with the 9 maidens keeping warm the cauldron of inspiration. You know, one of the few things we know about the Druids is that they used the Greek language for trade, you know, so some of those Greek mystery tradition ideas or poetic ideas found their way through into Northern European Celtic culture as well, you know, or they're sharing the same star lore. No, I don't know. Now, if you look at the bottom of this picture, it says Virgo. Of course, that's the maiden, the heavenly virgin. But broom, blackthorn, and elder all have a foot in Virgo. So it makes this the triple goddess of the Owen Grove, you know, but it also makes this the full moon reflection of Willow on the 7th of March. We've got this full moon coming. But what I'm pointing out is this dynamic relationship between Willow and Virgo. And we know that, you know, the virgin aspect of Hecate, triple goddess, is Willow, Helise. And the willow tree is the abode of the 9 muses. You know, it's very interesting. And in the Owen Grove, right next to the older tree and the cauldron of Anuin, the cauldron of poetic inspiration. So when we'll look now at the more regular herbal medicine side of the willow tree, but further on we'll talk about the role that the 9 maidens can play in regards to healing. I'll come back to that at the end, okay, because there is long Celtic traditions of the 9 sisters, 9 maidens, and healing. So the willow tree itself then has long been known as a beneficial tree for medicine. As long ago as 1500 BC, the ancient Egyptians were using willow bark for all sorts of medicine, and I'll talk about some of the things it's good for. But in ancient Egypt and ancient Mesopotamia, the willow was in everybody's first aid kit, you know, predominantly the bark of the willow tree. Now, the willow bark contains how do you pronounce it? Salicylic acid, which in the 1800s, I think, was synthetically turned into aspirin. Now, aspirin's very famous, of course, but quite interestingly, all of the benefits that aspirin gives you, that willow bark gives you anyway. Of course, aspirin can be patented and sold as pills, not getting into conspiracy theories, but there are people that have problems with taking too much aspirin. It can cause problem with the gut, you know, and the gastric linings and stuff. The people that have trouble taking too much aspirin are often usually fine drinking willow bark tea, you know, that the natural produce instead of a synthetic laboratory replica doesn't have any negative side effects like the aspirin does. So what's willow bark good for? So many things. The willow bark is usually drank as a tea, and if you don't want to harvest it yourself, you can buy it online quite easily. It's like I say, since ancient Egypt, it's a long established medicine. It's antibiotic, it's antifungal, it's used in pain management treatment, especially for lower back pain, osteoarthritis, headaches, and inflammatory conditions like tendinitis, you know, so it's a basic pain management thing. But as well as the bark, you can also use the leaves of the willow tree. And the leaves reduce fever and treat skin problems and toothache, in a bit of pain management again there. You can also use the tea as an external skin wash. So you can drink it, but you can wash your skin with it as well. And as a skin wash, it's antibacterial, it cleans out the pores, and it's really beneficial for people struggling with spots and acne, because it's antibacterial nature and stuff. So drinking the bark or the leaves has lots of pain management properties to it. Now, similar to the birch tree, the willow has a bracket fungus mushroom. It's just known as willow bracket mushroom, and it's very, very tough. It's hard like solid wood. So it's not something you can have a nibble of, but you can take it and turn it into powder. It's very similar to the turkey tail bracket mushroom, but it's unique to the willow tree. So it's not turkey tail, it's the willow bracket fungus or willow bracket mushroom. And again, you can buy this online as well as a ready-made supplement sort of thing. So it's not out there, it's not weird, you know, it's an recognized part of modern herbalism. Now, the benefits from the willow bracket fungus mushroom, similar to the tree bark, it's antibacterial, it's anti-tumor, so it's helped with cancer tumor reductions. It's anti-diabetic, helps balance the sugar levels. It boosts the immune system, it cleanses the liver, and it's anti-inflammatory. And it has proven to be a cognitive support. So a bit like, what was it, honey fungus mushroom or something, but it's good for the brain. It helps the brain cells restore themselves or regain cognitive ability. It's interesting how a lot of these mushrooms are almost working on the mycelium inside the human body as well, you know, like connecting nerve endings and synapses and so on. So that's all there is with the willow tree. The willow tree itself and this one symbiont fungi, the willow bracket mushroom. Now, thinking of Ceridwen gathering flowers, according to the books of astrologers, the flower in the British Isles that is going to blossom and open up during the time of the days of willow, you know, so in late February, is the sweet violet. And the sweet violet is a lovely little wildflower. Its leaves and its flowers are completely edible, slightly sweet tasting. The sugar candy Parma violets is a mimic of sweet violet, you know. And as a tea, the flowers can be added to your salad bowl. You can eat the leaves as well, but you can also drink it as a tea. And as a tea, it has very many benefits. Stress, helps with stress, fatigue, insomnia, helps reduce symptoms of the menopause. It's good for depression and also just good for colds and flus. So it's an all-round beneficial thing, the sweet violet. Curiously, and I didn't know there was a connection with the willow tree other than it flowers at this time of year, but it also contains salicylic acid, the same as the willow tree. So the same kind of thing that aspirin was a synthetic version of, you know. So curious, this time of year has that I can never pronounce it, salicylic acid. Now, so I haven't really rehearsed this or thought about it too deeply, but the 9 muses, then, this is a drum design I painted, and it's 9 owls around a cauldron with the 3 drops of inspiration in there. Now, the earliest reference in history to 9 ladies living on an island was written about, I think, in the 1st century AD, maybe the 2nd century AD, but it was an island off Brittany, a part of Brittany on the west coast called Finisterre, and there's an island off the coast called Ile de Son. And the Romans described it as having, that they're living 9 druidesses, 9 pagan Celtic priestesses, whatever you want to call them. This is pre-Christian Celtic times, you know, but these 9 maidens lived on this island, and no men were allowed on this island, you know, but the 9 sisters that lived there, they served the people. They were oracles, they were seers, and they were healers, you know. So there was this tradition of 9 maidens and healing going right back to the 1st or 2nd century AD. And that's not even mythology, that's Roman journalists writing stuff down in the 2nd century. I think it's not a myth. Then you jump forward. Well, you know, we've got many standing stone circles called the 9 Maidens, and there's many holy wells named after the 9 Maidens, whoever the 9 Maidens were. And then in the 11th century, 1050 AD, Geoffrey of Monmouth wrote the Life of Merlin. And in the Life of Merlin, Taliesin explains to Merlin how Taliesin and his friends took King Arthur, after he'd been mortally wounded, to Avalon, to the Isle of Apples, you know, and there were 9 sisters, and they received Arthur. Now, the head of the 9 sisters was the Lady Morgan, who in later romances becomes Morgan Le Fay, you know. But simplistically, it's 9 sisters on an island, and their main job is healing. You know, Arthur's broken body is taken there to be healed of its mortal wound, you know, and it's somewhere in the other world as well. Or, like Brittany, it's off land, it's off Finisterre. Finisterre means the end of the earth, and the Ile de Son Island is beyond the end of the earth, you know, and that's what Taliesin is telling Merlin in the Life of Merlin, you know. So, and then of course, you know, you get into later Welsh poems where Taliesin describes the cauldron of Annwn being kept warm by the breath of 9 maidens, you know. So all of this stuff can be traced back to the original 9 muses, which predate the Roman times by 700 years. And the 9 muses was the realm of the willow trees, Helicon, Helis, and that willow tree environment of the 9 muses was the source of poetic inspiration. So, just quickly before I finish then, knowing from the star law that the cauldron, the main cauldron that we're looking at for the 9 maidens is going to be your middle cauldron. And that corresponds with the maiden aspect of the triple goddess at Virgo, who in the Owen Grove is Broom. Broom is that maiden aspect, and she's the Grail maiden. She holds this celestial cauldron, which is, you'll find on the YouTube channel a video for the middle cauldron, and that'll go into it in more detail. But the middle cauldron it's your soul talking to you about what your soul needs. So ultimate healing, really. Yeah, there's healing for a broken arm or a knife wound or a black eye or any other mundane physical body problems, but there's also the soul healing. And the only thing that can, in my opinion, even begin to work on that soul healing is all of the middle cauldron stuff, which is your vocation and listening to your soul, getting to know your soul and working with it and the processes it's going through. And the way that's usually accessed and worked with is through the arts, music, writing, poetry, artwork, dance. These are the artistic, creative expressions which heal your soul and liberate your soul and allow your soul to express itself. It's an altogether different type of healing, but a very, very, very important one, because if you're not living your life's vocation, if you're not true to yourself, if you're not true to your soul, you are always going to be ill one way or another, So those 9 maidens, those 9 muses, being the goddesses of healing, are really about not so much sorting out your bruises and your cuts and your stings, but sorting out your soul healing, what is going to fix you through the rite of initiation before the salmon's leap to spring equinox and the rebirth moment. You're going to be pulled out of the salmon weir like Taliesin, and after you've been pulled out of the salmon weir, you're going to have a radiant brow. You're going to be an initiated one like Taliesin. But whilst you're in the salmon weir, the final healings are those 9 maidens keeping the cauldron warm to sort out your healing. So I'll keep recording and I'll shut the PowerPoint down and you can put your microphones back on and we'll talk about some of those ideas. So we can talk about the 9 maidens and soul healing and the arts, or we can talk about the medicine as well, all of it, really. Can anybody add to the medicine knowledge first?
Well, it ties in with the 9 maidens as healing.
Yeah.
I wonder if you've come across something called the solfeggio scale. There's something called the solfeggio scale, which is 9 key resonances in the universe. And they're different levels of healing, each one. The key one is 528 hertz, and that's reckoned to be the soul one. But you can look this up if you want. And one of them equates directly with the earth resonance, an earth note, if you like. But I'm only struck by the fact there's 9 of them, and in my poetic way of looking at things, it may have nothing to do with it, but I find it interesting that there's these sacred resonances which have healing properties, which I mean, yeah, who knows? I'd throw that in the pot. I'd put that in the cauldron.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, traditionally, the Greek 9 muses, they govern music, and you know, music's a big part of it.
You know? So who knows?
Yeah. So how does that fit in with? I don't know a lot about music, but I know there's a pentatonic scale of 5, and there's the traditional system we use in the West today that has an octave. So that's like 5 or 8. Does not with that somehow?
No, it doesn't really equate with that. I mean, what I found interesting, I don't know a lot about it, I'll be honest, but what I'm led to believe, and I don't think it's a conspiracy theory, but I'm led to believe that the modern scale led us away from that. And there's some people suggest that it closed down the right-hand side of our brain and divorced us in large measure from the soul. And who knows? But I mean, I don't know what the relationship is between that scale, other than it was used apparently extensively in Gregorian chant. So that give you a flavour of the sort of healing music.
That was based on the hymn of St. John's.
Mm-hmm.
That was based on that originally.
What's that, the Gregorian chanting?
Yeah, it's a hymn called the Hymn of St. John's. And they based the frequencies on each note. And one of the notes, I don't know now, they call the miracle. No, it's I'm trying to find the English word.
Miracle?
Yes, miracle note. And I think is I'm not sure now, maybe the re. Do, re, mi. No, the mi.
As in do, re, mi, fa, so.
I know in the Qigong world, there are some Qigong systems where people tone different tones, and the theory is it heals different internal organs. So there's a tone for the heart, and a tone for the kidneys, and a tone for the intestines. That kind of idea.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, sound healing was just something that in ancient times was used throughout all different cultures: Egypt, India, the Celtic worlds, the Native American traditions. When I was living in the ashram and studying Sanskrit, to recite Sanskrit, you had to be able to recite it with the right intonation in order to really receive the benefit of the mantra. And that's why in the tradition that I was following, it was so important that you had a disciplic succession. But also in the native traditions that I've been brought up in, there's a whole talk about the different notes in the scale and what they contribute to vibrationally. So it just makes so much, and it goes on, you know, with all these different traditions. But what makes the most sense to me is that these 9 maidens, these 9 well maidens, keeping the cauldron warm, were using toning and sound healing. And when you take that and then you bring that into, like, let's say Bach flower remedies or flower remedies, where you're actually not, you know, the whole process of creating flower remedies, I'm sure we're all aware of, is all about vibration. And And it's a, you know, I raised 5 sons, and all 5 of them reacted differently to different types of, you know, non-traditional medicine. But the one thing that they all were very responsive to was flower remedies. And I think it has to do with the fact that when we're harvesting these flowers, the essence of these flowers, we're harvesting their vibration, and vibration goes back to sound.
Mhm.
I'm done.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah,
oh, and it also says in the Vedas that in the spiritual world, people do not speak, they sing, and they do not walk, they dance. So if you think about these traditional languages, or you even look into another foreign language and you don't quite know what they're saying, it does sound very much like a song. So
Mhm.
Yep.
I'd like to
been-
transition. Oh, go ahead.
no, just
Well, just quickly to say that willow tree for me was the first tree I related to as a very young child. It's like first memory stuff, like maybe 3 years old, and I was by water. So my left brain was not engaged, and my right brain was very childlike and simple. And the song of the water and the sound of the leaves of the trees and the comforting feeling of being under the tree and on the earth and embraced by the mother is, I think, what we're also getting to in the most simplest way without our intellectual overlay, is we're talking about the same thing as that source of being just literally immersed in source with the sound, with the earth, with all the surrounding earth, air, you know, with you. And that to be in the space of and of course I'm thinking with weeping willow, right? But in the space of that original sound of nature.
mhm.
I've
And the
been several
vibration.
times.
Oh,
I've been
sorry.
several times in the Amazonian forest, and still there now, singing during their healing ceremonies. It's a large part. They sing the whole night. They sing first of all to call the spirits, and then at a certain moment when they start to do the healings, they sing special songs for the healing.
Mhm.
The unborn child hears the world before it comes out and sees it, but it's getting an impression of something going on because it does hear it while it's in the womb.
And all the vibrations.
I left a link on the chat there to the 9 tones of the Salvaggio scale, little descriptions of it. You can also hear them.
Hello. Hi, everyone.
Hi there, Jim.
Andrew?
Yeah, it's Andy. Yeah, something that I really appreciated that someone was just saying then about the oh my God, what was it? Sorry, it was oh. You know what the thought? I had a thought and it ran away. I think it was just my scatterbrain today a little bit.
Come back when you've got it back.
Yeah, I'll come back when it comes back, if it comes back. Thank you.
Want to say something? Jim?
I didn't say anything.
Oh, I thought you did. Sorry, that was me. I thought you had.
Gary, can I share my picture of the 9 muses, of the 9 willows?
Yep, please.
Oh, I'm disabled. Can I get a way into there, or is that too much trouble?
I think only the host can show a PowerPoint thing.
Yeah.
I don't think you can. Can you show it from a book?
Yeah, it takes a second.
What's interesting, I mean, I get a bit nervous still on the Facebook group because there's quite a big audience in Ireland. And of course, the OM is Irish. And I get nervous when I start talking about ancient Greece or Egypt or Mesopotamia or even Welsh law, because some people would consider none of that authentically Irish. But what's really interesting, another book I've been working on is islands. I've been working on the history and archaeology of the Ogham, and Ireland's own historical writings claim descent from descendants of Noah, so that's ancient Palestine, or an Egyptian princess called Scota. So even Ireland, with its very origin stories, is pointing at the Mediterranean cultures that were around in the Bronze Age, if you like, So, and knowing that the Druids used Greek as a trade language, I hope people can take on board the influence of the nine muses and ideas like that, because Ireland wasn't an island, it was part of a very cosmopolitan world in which ancient cultures shared ideas, so whilst trying to be respectful to the Ogham, it's not separate from the ancient things that were happening in the Mediterranean and in the Celtic Sea and the Atlantic coastline and so on. Anyway, Franklin.
While researching the story of Branwen, I discovered that the Fir Bolgs spent 200 years as servants in Greece. So that was interesting. The root culture in the Irish.
So just before you start, Franklin, then, so even if there isn't an ancient world influence on Celtic Iron Age Ireland, by the time you get to early medieval Irish bards and Welsh bards, they have been thoroughly influenced by the ancient world. So you have to separate your brain from the Celtic Druids of the Iron Age and the bardic traditions of the medieval times, in which they did have the zodiac and Greek philosophy and all the rest of it and stuff, Anyway, Franklin.
Robin Williams also drops the line when Brutus the Trojan landed in at the port of Totnest. The language spoken there was British or crooked Greek.
Oh, cool.
Crooked Greek would be the trade language, wouldn't it?
Oh, right.
Yeah.
So here, I don't know if you can see it. Here's my picture of the willow, and you can see there's like three willows hidden behind the big willow. So there's 9 willows, or there's 2 willows hidden behind there, and
Gorgeous.
and then you can see there's the other world inside the mounds, one descending and one ascending, and then there are 9 dwarves working underground, which represent if we get lost in the other world, right? If we fall into a psychosis through too much psychedelic or too much involvement with the mythopoeic world, then getting our hands on simple work, on task, getting involved in the material world is the way back into this world, back out of the collapse into the other world. So that's dwarf work. And you'll come across the dwarf work in a lot of fairy tales when the character is in a stage of transition. They're dealing with, living with the dwarves and doing work for the dwarves. And that is coming back into this world. But then deep down at the very core of the world, there is a star, but the star is an embryonic star. Mother Earth is pregnant with a star, and in the womb, we are all equal, right? Until we're born and we take the breath, the spirit of the world into us and become individuated as an individual with a particular name, a particular culture in a particular country. Before that, we're all just one and the same in the womb. And in the center of the earth is a star that's being born.
Perfectly said.
Geez, Franklin, you should make cards or a banner or something out of that. That's amazing. I love it.
Thanks, Mom.
Yeah, cards would be wonderful.
Something
Banners too.
Thanks.
really beautiful.
With the
Beautiful.
explanation too, all of the beautiful symbology you've woven in to see it, to look for it and see it.
Yeah. Hey, what is Isle Descent? How do you spell that? Isle Descent or Isle Descent? Where did these nine
ILSE.
maidens live? On Ile de Sang?
Oh, yeah, so I'll spell it I-L-E, that's just island, I-L-E, and then D-E, French for of, Isle of, and then it's S-E-I-N. So it looks like Seine, but
Like the Seine.
but it's
that's
pronounced Son. So Ile de Sang.
Huh, because, the Seine am I dreaming, or isn't the Seine the river that flows past the Notre Dame?
Yes.
And Isle de City is where the French revolutionists thought that there was an ancient temple of Isis on the Isle de City.
So here's the thing, you can't prove this, the archaeology isn't there, but theoretically it's sound, is that, in the late Bronze Age, the Phoenicians were trading all over the Mediterranean, and they only had to slip through the Pillars of Hercules and travel north up the Spanish and French coastline to the British Isles. So there's sound theories of Phoenician traders traveling up through the Celtic Sea to the British Isles and so on. Now, where they traded, they used all of the islands as banks, as safety deposit boxes, because you can defend an island. So off the coastline, any usable island like Ile de Sang was used by the Phoenicians to stash all their cargo and wealth and everything that they traded with people, But
Yuri, down in, I used to live it before I retired and moved. I lived near Tintagel, and there was a big archaeological dig going on down there, and they found evidence of Phoenician trading. They dug up a lot of pottery. They certainly were coming to Tintagel, because at that time Tintagel was a place where a lot of trading and a lot of bartering went on.
Yeah.
So they were certainly in Tintagel. If they were in Tintagel, they were going further.
So Cornwall was, before it was called Cornwall, you had the entire Bronze Age, and the Bronze Age is copper and tin to make bronze. So you can't have a Bronze Age without tin. And there's actually very, very few places on the planet where you can get tin. And Cornwall is one of those places. The island that we now call St. Michael's Mount theoretically was a Phoenician tin port for taking tin to mainland Europe for the Bronze Age in Europe, so they'd have used the Channel Islands and Ile de Sang and Tintagel and St. Michael's Mount and Mont Saint-Michel, and all those places were probably part of that tin trade before Celtic times, Bronze Age, and the Phoenicians were the vehicle for trading all that stuff.
I saw, one of these scientific specials recently, and it's very recent, they were studying Tintagel, and then the speculation was, it's starting to look like King Arthur was a real historical king, and he came from Tintagel.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And there's a Merlin stone from Tintagel.
Oh, wow.
From Merlin's cave. You'll know it, Rob.
Yeah, I've got one guy, yeah.
Can I just remark, there's 21 of us in this group at the moment. I just like the symmetry of that in relation to the at least 20 trees and you. I also just want to comment, I lived in a place called the Willows, in a yurt, which was there were 7 species of willows that are planted up. I lived there for 4.5 years in the Willows, and people did in the end say, you need to move out of there, JJ, because it does have a very watery, there is an energy and a feel to it, and it was very otherworldly. But in the end, I needed to come out of that place, It was very beautiful and healing, but also had a particular quality, very willowy.
Just put a question out there then, throw this to the whole group. How do you think the Nine Maidens help us to work with our middle cauldrons to become radiant brows?
Good question.
Inspiration.
Yeah, but what do we do? You know, what do we do with that inspiration? How do we use it to become radiant?
Hi everyone, Kushla here, just coming in from New Zealand. And I guess when you're in a group, you're kind of part of that group consciousness. And last night I taught a yoga class, and normally we bring the arms up like this and over the head. And last night I felt inspired to bring them out. And I mentioned bringing your arms out in a more open space, so the heart was open. And I used the phrase, you know, your arms are like a chalice. And so that might be a lovely way to invite in healing from the muses, to perhaps open your heart space to healing. Yeah, and that would be a real embodiment of something that we're talking about cognitively, perhaps, as an idea.
From a Tai Chi Qigong perspective, the middle cauldron is the heart cauldron, and it's governed by the pericardium channel, which is your arms. So literally using your arms come together at your heart center in a way, you know, whereas the spine is connecting the pineal gland to your root, but the arms are your heart meridian, your heart channel, you know.
Or praying, maybe them.
You at one time, Yuri, say that the Celts or the Chinese were very rare to use the upper cauldron?
From a martial art perspective, they would focus on the lower cauldron, but to be an all-rounded individual, you need all three cauldrons working, you know. But
absolutely.
The martial artists focused on the lower cauldron for physical, and the key word there is physical, for physical movement. And
right.
the Irish manuscript was focusing on the upper cauldron, trying to receive divine inspiration and poetic inspiration, you know, but they're both the same.
What we need.
They're both the same three cauldrons. And the Chinese way would be, you know, you work on your lower cauldron, the well-being of the middle cauldron depends on that. And if the middle cauldron is happy, then there's good spirit in the upper cauldron, you know. But that good spirit would be that radiant brow. I think what I was trying to get at with my rather awkward question was this idea that salmon in the salmon weir, that every initiate going through the initiations is a salmon in the salmon weir. And the salmon uniquely swim upriver back to their source from where they began, you know, and I don't think that was lost on the bards. You know, they understood this fish went back to its source. And so, you know, somehow as a potential salmon of wisdom, as an individual, can you go back to your source? Can you go back to where your soul comes from? You know, not your flesh and bone body, but your soul.
And that's the salmon that goes down the freshwater stream, and when it reaches the saltwater ocean, it changes itself into a saltwater fish, and it dives into this other world that's filled with mysteries and terrors that it has to manage to escape, and eventually it returns back, knowing somehow the stream from whence it came, and struggles back upstream. And then in one final amazing transformation, it sheds its skin and returns as a minnow to go through it once again.
I think there's something there of how intuition is really key, just that following that like deep knowing of how to get home.
Yeah,
yeah,
I love that phrase, how to get home.
How to get home.
Yeah,
we're born in a physical manifested world, and we're caught in our senses in this world, but then we realize that there's an other world that is the imagination. And if you train the imagination, it literally, you know, you enter the imaginal realm, which is an objective, invisible realm where images live for thousands of years. And you can encounter these living images in another world very close to this world, occasionally interacting with our world.
I'll share with you because it's relevant. I think my animal name is Wild Salmon Swimming Home. So, I mean, as it happens, but in answer to your question, Yuri, I think what the salmon uniquely does, it goes through a series of deaths in a way, because it dies to its freshwater self to adapt to the sea, and later it dies to its deep sea self to readapt and transform into its freshwater, and then it swims. It does everything. I mean, it does everything unusual, really. But the essence for me is it dies to itself. There is a death. There's something for me about returning to the source, is dying during life, to die to one's self, whatever, however you want to name that. I'll just share a little bit. There's a lovely poem. It was written 800 years ago. It's called Gambling the Self. The stakes are high for real prayer. You must gamble yourself and be willing to lose. When you have done this and the self shakes off what you believed yourself to be, then no prayer remains, only a sparkle in the eyes. Knower and known are one. The poem goes on, but you get the idea. And I think there's something in there for me about this gambling the self. The salmon gambles itself and doesn't always win. A lot of them die en route.
Oh, it's a hazardous journey.
Yeah.
And our ego dies over and over and over again.
Exactly that.
Only a tiny fraction make it through. They nearly all die.
Yeah.
I'd like to say something more about the elemental phrasing of all of this. As a priestess of Bridget, I've always connected Willow to Bridget. Until I started studying the Ogham with you, Yuri, Willow was Bridget for me, and the whole concept of the fire being used by the maker, being used by the dwarves, and using the fire to make things and do the metalwork, bringing us back from the underworld, which is the deep well where Bridget also lives at the bottom of this dark well of our subconscious, that she holds the balance of these things for us in this time of year. And as we head toward spring equinox, where the fire comes fully forward for us in a bigger way, and we're leaving the water's edge, as you've described it, there's something very Bridget about all this for me in the way that I use the archetypes in my own work. Just bringing the fire in that way.
As you're talking, thoughts I'm getting is that there was a tradition of the sisters at Kildare keeping the eternal flame there, numbering 9.
They were.
Another tradition says 19, but there is a tradition that says 9. And also, if you think of this first ACMA going from Birch to Rowan and Bridget and Imbolc, then it's concluding with the salmon's leap to Aries, which is the first fire sign. And it's the fire of the rising sun and the dawn and stuff. So that whole ACMA is this rising of light from winter solstice to the spring equinox, but it concludes with Aries, the fire sign, Yes,
I think that's what I'm trying to describe, that we're going through this, what we're all talking about in the various ways, the salmon changing, all of this is this rebirth correspondence of this first ACMA, and then, like you say, ending in the Aries. It's all part of some kind of magical elemental shifting for me.
And I know we're looking at healing this year, but Bridget is a goddess of healing. The whole Branwen story suggested traumatic healing. And now the 9 sisters are known as healing sisters as well. So there's, with the water's edge, there's definitely this healing emphasis.
Peter Kingsley traces the story of the Holy Grail back to the story of Empedocles, who is said to have thrown himself into a volcano. And he compares the lava and molten power in the volcano to the secret fire at the heart of everything created, including our instinctual self. When we tap into our genius, our divine immortal spirit, it's a huge inflation, and we can find ourselves on a soapbox proclaiming, all these amazing visions that are coming down through the upper cauldron. But it's related to that molten fire that's later the Holy Grail that the 9 muses are warming with their breath.
Hey, does anyone have any thoughts about yeah, the willow and fire, or we've just been talking about that, but what I mean is how it's how it's so watery. It's almost like I've almost been getting the feeling I don't really want to burn willow. I burn a lot of wood, but the feeling not even to burn it doesn't seem like it's a good thing to burn. Does anyone else have any feelings on that at all?
We burned a lot of it where we lived for a few years. It burns quickly. It's not a very heat giving. I mean, you don't get masses of heat from willow, but it's good for getting the fires going. Dry willow. We preferred elm or ash, but given that we were surrounded by willow and had to cut some down, then we used it in the fires.
But it's not even particularly good to burn, though, is it? Really, I mean, it's okay, but it's like that's definitely not its strength as a wood.
No.
It's much more baskets and maybe for making compost.
Well, that was there is
and medicine.
This is a bit on a tangent, but Taliesin was found in the salmon weir, and the salmon weir belonged to a Welsh hero demigod called Gwythno Garan here. And Gwythno Garan here had one of the 13 treasures of Britain, which was a magical basket. And we were talking about this time last year with the Zoom session, and it turned out that a lot of salmon weirs were actually, the way of catching the salmon was great big baskets that the salmon were trapped in when they were swimming back up river. And all those big salmon catching baskets were made of willow work, wicker and stuff, So willow also caught the salmon of wisdom as well.
It would have been osier willow.
Yes.
It would have been osier. Yeah. Which is it doesn't grow as big as the other willow types. And and of course it's got beautiful colors. You can get them red and yellow and orange. But that's what the basket makers normally use is osier.
Is it easier to bend or something?
Yes, it is. Yeah. It's the you can actually bend the main trunk in such a way that the side branches come up straight, and that's how you harvest them, and then they're easier to weave.
Right. It's osier to bend. Yes.
Yeah.
Crack willow's just going to snap.
Boom, boom.
I really want to mention this one important thing that we haven't really looked at or addressed, and that is when I was doing my training for Anipi ceremonies or native sweat lodge work, I was trained to approach the willow in the spring with a prayer and an offering by the water, and that there were certain designs. I was trained in the Morning Star design, but there's a certain way that you cut these willow branches and you form this sweat lodge, and that sweat lodge represents the womb of the earth. And it's just the willows traditionally that are used for that sweat lodge. So when you're entering into the womb of the earth, there's this whole respectful manner of, how you enter the lodge and how you leave the lodge, and that each time that you leave the lodge, you're being rebirthed. And so the willow it's very important in that manner too. And I'm sorry, I forgot your name, but you were mentioning about the basket making. It's exactly the same type of principle, and that they consider that you're taking the willow tree from the water, and that the fire, which is created outside to heat the rocks, is representing the fire, and the rocks are representing the earth, and then our singing was representing the air, and the continuity of all of them together represented spirit. So I just wanted to mention that because it's kind of a big deal to some of us.
Yeah, no, thank you.
Cool.
We're running out of time, so let's turn the microphones off and I'll stop recording. We'll do our meditation.